Hi YouTube, this is Kelsey from Anna Porter Public Library, also known from Instagram as Kels Reads Things, and I am here on this Wednesday afternoon to finally discuss with you the fourth installment in the Throne of Glass series, Queen of Shadows by Sarah J. Maas. Now, this video is going to contain probably quite a bit of spoilers, but in the beginning, I'm just going to do a quick recap. So if you have not read this book, I do not recommend that you listen or watch this video after I complete my recap. For those who are not familiar with this series, it is a young adult series with quite a bit of violence. There's some language and just a little bit of adult content, so I would recommend it for an older audience. Again, professionally as a librarian, it is not my job to tell you what you can read or what is acceptable or even age appropriate. However, I just like to give my audience a little bit of an idea of what to expect whenever they pick up a book that I have read. Okay. So now I'm going to go ahead and tell you what rating I gave it. I gave this book a 5-star rating. Sarah J. Maas never ceases to amaze me. All of her characters are extremely diverse. They are very entertaining, and they're their own people. They all have their own personalities, and also the world building that Sarah J. Maas creates for all of her series is always spectacular and very gripping, as well as very informative. There's never been a time in which I've read a Sarah J. Maas book and I've thought, I wish I had known a little more about this region or that region or these characters, because she is very thorough in her writing. And because of that, I gave this a 5-star review. There was, the themes is obviously fantasy and adventure. There's a lot of character development in this installment of the series specifically, and so far it is my absolute favorite of the 5 that I've read. And I say 5 again because Assassin's Blade is the prequel to the series. I myself read the prequel before I read the first book. Some people would recommend that you read the prequel after you read the third book, Heir of Fire. I can see it either way. If you're a person who likes to have a lot of background information about characters before you dive into a series, then I recommend reading the prequel first. If that's not as important to you and you kind of want to wait and get to know the characters as you're reading, then I recommend taking other readers' advice and reading the prequel after you've read the third installment, Heir of Fire. Okay, speaking of Heir of Fire, I am now going to take the time to kind of do a little bit of a recap about what happens in that book so we can start to discuss what happens in this one. And again, as soon as I start mentioning the things that I enjoyed about this fourth book, I'd recommend, if you haven't read it yet, to go ahead and stop the video now and pick up a copy today from your local library. Okay, so recap of what happens at the end of Heir of Fire. Aelin has spent all of her time at this point in Mistward, where she has been training and honing her fire abilities. We discovered in the second book that she is Aelin Galathynius. She is the heir and rightful queen of Terrasen, the country that was unfortunately taken over by the king of Otterland 10 years ago, in which Aelin escaped with her life. And she just recently destroyed the general known as Narok. He was being possessed by a demon known as the, I think they're pronounced the Balg. That could be incorrect. I will obviously make that correction in my next video when I read the 5th installment of this series, Empire of Shadows. So if I mispronounce that, I apologize, Sarah J. Maas. So Aelin has made a statement to the king of Ardalan by destroying his general Narok with her fire magic. Once the king discovers that Aelin is back, he calls in Aedion, his most trusted general of the north, who happens to also be Aelin's cousin. He also calls in Kaol, who is the captain of the guard, and his son Dorian and Dorian's girlfriend, the healer in the castle, Sorsha. And unfortunately, the king takes this time to kidnap Aedion and plans to execute him during Dorian's birthday party. He has a Valg prince possess Dorian, his son, and he does that especially because Dorian has extreme magical capabilities, and that's what these Valg creatures, demons, do. They possess humans who have magical capabilities and hone that power for themselves and then take over that person to where that person more or less no longer exists. And so he captured Aedion, he kicked out Kaol, or I think Kaol actually escapes, excuse me, and has entrapped his own son at this point with the demon. So that's kind of where we're at the end of Heir of Fire. Now, the major plot points for Queen of Shadows, I'm finally going to discuss what's happening with this book now. So again, if you haven't read it yet, I suggest you pick up a copy of yourself and then watch the rest of this video. Okay, so Aelin has discovered what's happened, what the king has done with Dorian, what he continues to plan to do, and she is now returning to Adarlan to stop him. She plans on destroying the clock tower, which has stifled magic. It's how the King Adarlan was able to make magic just cease 10 years ago. And she also plans to, if she has to, killing Dorian, because she doesn't believe at this point that he is capable of being saved. And let's see, Rowan, who she trained with in the previous book, has taken a blood oath to her, which means he's basically donating his life and his time to Aelin at this point. And they actually re-meet, and that's one of my favorite moments in the entire book, was when they reunited. It was beautiful and powerful and emotional and just wonderful. Like everything Sarah J. Maas writes, I just can't get enough of her. She's amazing. Okay, Aedion worked with Kaol to take down the King of Adarlan, and now he is waiting in a dungeon cell to be executed during Dorian's birthday party. And Aelin is also planning to save him from that. And along the way, she ends up having to actually partner with her her old caretaker. I say caretaker, but honestly, he more or less kidnaps Aelin when she's a small child of 8 and trains her to be an assassin for his assassin's keep. So she agrees to work with him towards the beginning of this story. She plans to capture a Valg and present it to him if he agrees to help her rescue Aedion. Kaol's main goal at this point in the story is to free Dorian of the collar that he has on and free him of the demon that's inside of him. And Manon Blackbeak, apparently I was pronouncing her name incorrectly in the last video I did about Throne of Glass, so I apologize for that. But Manon Blackbeak, at this point in her story, is starting to really question her own loyalties. She and her 13 witch clan have been relocated to Morath, where they're under the direct order of Duke Parrington, who is just a bad guy all around. And we later learn in this book that witches are actually the resulted offspring of Valg demons who mated with Fey creatures. So, the king is asking, as well as Duke Parrington, for Manon to agree to have witches breed with the Valg in order to create an even stronger species. And that can get very, very scary. And again, Manon is at this point kind of questioning her loyalties, questioning what she wants, and even developing a heart, so to speak. Okay, we also are introduced to awesome new characters, such as Alid Lochon. Again, I will correct these pronunciations later. She was the daughter of Cal and Marian Lochon, who are both dead. And we learn in the previous book that her mother, Marian, actually helped save Aelin from the forces that were taken over during Terrasen. And she was adopted by her evil uncle, Vernon. And they had plans to actually mate Alid with a Valg prince. she ends up actually being kind of taken under the wing of Manon, of all the creatures, because when we're first introduced to Manon, she is kind of this heartless, evil creature, and a lot of witches are at that point in the story, but again, you know, her character is developing. There was a lot of character development in this book in general, and that was something that I love. And basically, at some point, by the end of the book, Elide has been given a word key by Caltaine. And we'll talk about that a little bit. I'll talk about that a little bit later. And it is now her mission to locate Selena Serdothian. But she isn't aware that Selena is actually Aelin. So I look forward to reading about how they're going to end up converging. And also, Lysandra is mentioned in Assassin's Blade, which is the prequel. And I don't believe she's brought up much at all in the Throne of Glass book or the other books until this installment. I'd have to double check, but we get to learn a whole lot more about her as well. She acts as a courtesan who was also kind of raised by Arobynn Hamel, you know, the Assassin's Keep main assassin. And we learn a lot more about her character. We find out that she is a shapeshifter, and she actually becomes friends with Aelin, and they end up partnering together to take down Arobynn himself. Okay, and also the King of Adarlan. So the things that I really, truly enjoyed about this book, as I mentioned previously, is all the characters were unique and dynamic. Aelin, at this point, we know she's exceedingly intelligent, but in this book specifically, she ends up being snarky, sarcastic, hilarious, cunning, and very articulate, and you learn that she is very much a person who plots. She is cunning and has an agenda of her own, almost to a fault. There are many points in which she self-sacrifices herself, and also withholds information from her friends just for their protection and to meet her own needs. Rowan comes back and they reunite, and it's a beautiful moment, and he definitely in this book projects his protective nature. He's bold and strong, and his love for Aelin grows just as the fire inside her does, and I think that's just so beautiful. Lysandra, we learn at the courtesan, as I mentioned just a moment ago. She's also intelligent, she's sassy, she's also self-sacrificing, kind, and she becomes a caretaker to Evangeline, who is a little girl who was supposed to be a courtesan. However, Lysandra made sure that that wouldn't happen. And another thing that I really enjoyed about this novel specifically is we learn a little more about the history of the witches. We learn a little more about what exactly the plan is for the King of Adarlan, how he's creating these demons, what they're doing to take over these human bodies. The plot just seems to thicken quite a bit in this book, and it was just incredible. So now I'm going to dive into a few quotes that I exceptionally enjoyed, and I'm going to do it by character. So the quotes from Aelin or about Aelin are the ones I'm going to discuss now. This quote comes from when she and Chaol are reunited again, and at this point Chaol is not pleased with Aelin at all. He doesn't even see her as who she was, his former lover. He doesn't see her as his friend anymore. In fact, he actually calls her a monster at one point, because he believes that those who yield magic look down on humans. And he basically blames Aelin for the encounter with the king at the end of book 2, in which, you know, the king takes over Dorian, or has a demon take over his body, kills Sorsha in front of all of them, captures Aedion, and Chaol escapes. So this was Aelin's response to him calling her a monster. You do not get to blame me for that, for his actions, the King of Adarlan. She clenched her fists as she looked at him, really looked at him, at the scar that would forever remind her of what he did and what she could not forgive. And the scar refers to whenever she scratches his face in book 2, because he withheld information about the threat on Nehemia's life, and as a result she did die. So there's that. And this is going back, this is a few pages later about her own inner monologue in terms after she meets with Kaol. For her friends, for her family, she would gladly be a monster. For Rowan, for Dorian, for Nehemia, she would debase, degrade, and ruin herself. That was something I loved about Aelin. As I mentioned earlier, she's a very self-sacrificing character. She will do whatever it takes to protect the ones that she loves. And this quote actually comes from where she and Manon finally meet. And I absolutely loved how they meet because, of course, they're enemies at first. And they are fighting each other basically to the death. But she ends up saving Manon's life. Basically, she's being questioned by Rowan. He asks, "Why did you save that witch's life?" And this was Aelin's response. "How can I take away somebody who means the world to someone else?" And she says that because Asteron, the number 2 to Manon, and her cousin screams her name as she's about to die. Even if she's my enemy. So Aelin shrugs. "I thought you were dying. It seemed like bad luck to let her die out of spite." And, she snorted, falling into a ravine seemed like a pretty way to die for somebody who fights that spectacularly. So I'm very much looking forward to seeing these two characters become friends, because after Manon is saved by Aelin, she actually has an interaction with Dorian before she even meets up with Aelin, and she discovers that Dorian is still inside there. He isn't completely destroyed by the demon inside him, and she leaves a message for Aelin later to say, and lets him know, what was it? Witch killer, the human is still inside him. So Dorian's life does become spared, and he eventually does get released from the demon that's inside him. The demon gets destroyed, and then at the very end, he, Aelin, and all others are trying to basically recreate the world as a whole, and also take down the Valg armies that are still present. Okay. Now this is another quote about Aelin. "She was the heir of fire. She was fire, and light, and ash, and embers. She was Aelin Fireheart, and she burned for no one and nothing, save the crown that was her blood, that was hers by blood and survival and triumph." And then my absolute favorite quote from Aelin throughout this entire book was when she's about to go and fight against the king of Adarlan. "Then she smiled with every last shred of courage, of desperation, of home, for the glimmer of that glorious future. Let's go rattle the stars." Okay, those were the quotes from Aelin. Now I'm going to do the ones from Lysandra. She actually ends up murdering Arobin Hamel due to having killed her lover Wesley, having killed her friend Sam, who was also Aelin's first love interest. And this is her explaining how she wanted to murder Arobin, but she didn't feel like it was her place. "After he murdered Wesley, I lay awake in his bed and thought about killing him right there. But it didn't seem like enough, and the debt didn't belong only to me." And Aelin at one point has a conversation with her and gives her permission, or not even really permission, she just says, "You know what, you have the right to kill Arobin. It needs to be you." And she does, and it was awesome. And also a quote about her and Aelin discussing monstrosity. "Please," Lysandra said, waving a manicured hand, "you and I are nothing but wild beasts wearing human skin. Don't even try to deny it." The courtesan had no idea how close she was to the truth. Aelin wondered how the woman would react to her other form, to the elongated canines. Somehow, she doubted Lysandra would call her a monster for it, or for the flames at her command. And we also learned at one point that Lysandra is a shapeshifter, so she's looked down on as well, and that's why she believes she is a monster. Okay, so here are some quotes from Rowan, and it's kind of him realizing Aelin's place in the world, and also the person that she has become. "At last she met his stare, with eyes that were too old, too sad, and too tired to be 19. It had been a mistake to ever call her a girl. And there were indeed moments when Rowan forgot how young she truly was. The woman before him shouldered burdens that would break the spine of someone 3 times your age. If you're a monster, I'm a monster, Rowan said. And that's kind of the theme throughout the book, is Aelin is struggling with her guilt still, and also she does feel a little bit like she's looked down on like a monster, but at the same time, she learns that those who really love her stand by her and also have great capabilities and great power, but they're still standing with her. And maybe they're not monsters after all. And this is him speaking to her specifically. You will make mistakes. You will make decisions, and sometimes you will regret those choices. Sometimes there won't be a right choice, just the best of several bad options. I don't need to tell you that you can do this. You know you can. I wouldn't have sworn an oath to you if I didn't think you could. Okay. And finally, actually I'm going to do 2 more. One from Chaol himself, just to let you know, they do, of course, make up. He and Aelin have another conversation much later on in the book, and he's apologized for calling her a monster previously. And this is him. They're just kind of having a little bit of a resolution in this moment. But you were never just Celaena, and I think you knew that. Deep down, even before everything happened. I understand now. And finally, this is a quote from Kaltain. And Kaltain originally was kind of Celaena / Aelin's enemy, but at this point she is also under the mountain at Moroth, as well as with Manon, and she is definitely very much against the king and everything does, but she has magical capabilities. She has Shadowfire, as it's known, and she actually sacrifices herself so Manon and Elide and all the other witches can get out and get the word key to Celaena. Kaltain just squeezed Elide's fingers. You find Celaena Sardathian. Give her this. No one else. No one else. Tell her that you can open any door if you have the key. And tell her to remember her promise to me. To punish them all. When she asks why, tell her I said they would not let me bring the cloak she gave me, but I kept a piece of it. To remember that promise she made. To remember to repay her for a warm cloak in a cold dungeon. Okay, well that's all I have today for Queen of Shadows. Again, it was an incredible read. So much happens. The King of Ardalan is eventually freed of his own demon who is inside him. We learn that later on, and he actually dies. However, now Aelin is traveling with her court, which include Aedion, Lysandra, and Rowan, and they're all traveling back to Terrasen to reestablish herself as queen and basically get their empire and their armies started again. Dorian is left behind, of course, because he has to basically rebuild Otterlin, and Manon is at this point obviously trying to fight against the Valg because they were obviously torturing witches. And she's kind of deciding where her loyalties lie as well. And Elide at this point is trying to locate Celaena / Aelin. Okay, well I look forward to discussing with you the next installment of the book, Empire of Storms. I likely will not get to that until a couple of Fridays from now, just because I have another read or two to pick from. I haven't quite decided what I'm going to read next, but of course I will let you know on my Instagram. Thank you for watching. I hope it was entertaining. Let me know what you thought, and I look forward to seeing you on Friday, in which I'll be discussing my favorite genres of reading and why. Stay tuned. Thanks for watching. Bye, YouTube.